Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have an upload that I would normally do as a second half. Compelling video clips with terrifying encounters. So before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it definitely matters. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload, shall we? Alright, before we get into today's encounter, I would like to wish DJ a happy belated birthday. DJ, I hope you had a wonderful birthday, and thank you for being a great supporter of this channel. On to today's first encounter. At the time in my life when all of this occurred, my wife and I had made a move 2 years prior, coming from Buffalo, New York, downstate to an area near Herkimer. I was a welder by trade, but as I was 67, I had given up most of the bull work. I had begun doing what I call some custom design work. Taking advantage of the access granted by the internet, I had come up with a design for a somewhat universal set of transmission and motor mounts, which I could fabricate for use with Mercedes, Rolls-Royce, and Jaguar, in order to accommodate transplanting a Chevy V8 and transmission into the aforementioned vehicle. We had been living in this house for some 2 years, as I previously mentioned, and I had my shop set up in a barn which was located behind the house. I had put an exhaust system into the barn as well as a potbelly stove for heat, and I installed several double-hung windows to allow some light in as well as giving me some air when needed. One of these windows was installed directly in the middle of my main fabrication bench, from which I could look over a grassy field behind the barn. We had come to know some of the people in our area, most of which seemed to be fairly level-headed individuals. The reason why I mention this soon will be evident. So as time went on, a number of things began to go missing around the yard. I had certain tools which were used frequently, and I left in certain places, such as a fan rake and a broom, which had gone missing. After having replaced them, the replacements had disappeared as well. Knowing full well that I was not born with powder for a brain, and that my wife wouldn't so much as lift a broom or a rake, my thoughts were running in the direction of some mischievous local messing with me. Problem was, however, that all the nearby properties were inhabited by people who were 60 years old plus, with any of the younger folk being predominantly away in school or being hard-working individuals, none of which came to mind as being capable of such shenanigans. So I had decided to put up a couple of trail cams, mounting the high in the eaves of the house, in hopes of catching the culprit in the act. It was one evening in October of 2006, with the sun having set hours before, which I was working on one of my jigs facing one of the double-hung windows in my shop. Now, whenever my welder hit the metal, a huge bright flask of bluish white light illuminated the field through the window, much like a flash of lightning would. And even though I had my welder's hood down when this occurred, my eyes could still see if I allowed them to shift slightly. The field being lit up outside of the window. That night I had several sets of my adapters to fill orders on, and I was going to be in the shop for at least a few more hours. It must have been about 45 minutes into my work that I swore I saw a figure that was illuminated by a flash of the welder in the yard, but of course I couldn't just keep the welder going with my hood on and keep looking, and when I had stopped and flipped my hood up, it was dark again. I grabbed my flashlight and a shovel to use for defense if necessary, and walked out behind the barn to see if there was in fact anyone or anything out there. And there wasn't. At the time I had chalked it up to my imagination and left it alone. It was several weeks later, being the first week in November, that I went outside on a Saturday morning to do some cleanup of fallen branches, and my wheelbarrow wasn't where I had left it. I habitually left it leaning against a large tree so that water or ice wouldn't accumulate in it, and it was gone. Now, understand me please, one does not easily misplace a wheelbarrow and not know it. So I began to look around the property, and when I did, I found the wheelbarrow about 300 feet from the house, sitting by the edge of my field, and one of the missing brooms was next to it on the ground. Unfortunately, none of the trail cams were facing anywhere near where this wheelbarrow had been leaning on the tree, and no pictures had been taken either regardless. On that day I had moved everything and anything into the barn that could be carried off by hand, and kept them under lock and key until I could get to the bottom of what was going on. If my recollection correct, it was only maybe a few weeks later that I was once again out in the barn at night fabricating some adapters facing the very same window on my workbench, and once again, after I had been working for about an hour, I saw a figure standing out in the field when the welding flash went off. The difference being that this time, actually lousing up my work in the process, I continued to run a bead, which allowed the light from the welder to stay on as I was now looking up through the top of my shield glass, and I saw what was a huge Bigfoot watching what I was doing while standing in the field. I couldn't just keep the bead going endlessly, and I released the trigger. Of course, everything went dark, including my being able to see this creature. I was certain as to what I had seen. It was a huge creature covered in hair, long arms hanging away from what was an enormous V-shaped chest, and there was absolutely no mistaking it. Having now seen this creature, I was a little apprehensive about leaving the barn in the dark, and I actually phoned the police from my cell phone. All that I told them was that I had seen someone standing in my yard through the window as I was welding. When the trooper came, I opened the barn and walked out to greet him, while at the same time my wife had opened the door wondering what the heck was going on. As she and the trooper were now fully aware of exactly what had happened, the trooper walked around the area behind and around the barn and found nothing. While he was walking around, I had whispered to my wife that I had seen a Bigfoot, and her eyes lit up like two saucers in amazement. When the trooper came back, I told him about the missing tools and the like, and shortly thereafter he left. The truth be told, having seen the monster, I was afraid to leave the barn, not knowing what may happen, and had called the police for safety purposes. As my wife and I were now in the kitchen discussing what I had seen, I told her that my belief was now that this creature was being drawn into the yard by this continued flashing on and off of the bright light of the welder. When I saw it, the beast seemed to be mesmerized by the light coming on and off as I welded, and was just standing there watching. During the days following all of this, I had painted the glass in the windows a flat black and asked my wife to stand behind the barn as I welded to see if any of the light escaped, to which she said no. With the windows now being blacked out and all of the yard tools and items being locked up, nothing further had occurred, and I stopped welding in the barn at night for obvious reasons. It was that following spring, when the field behind our home was well soaked from the receding snow and the spring rains, that I was walking around behind the house, still not being able to shake off what I had seen, that I came upon numerous large footprints well formed in the soft grass. They were both deep and long, having obviously been made by this enormous creature. They were formed in a virtually straight line coming and going from the adjoining wood line which connected to my neighbor's lot, none of which were leading in the direction of our home, thank God. When I saw this creature that was now fully illuminated by the welder's light, it had to have been 8 feet tall. It was absolutely gigantic. As the welder's light lit up its face, I could see that it was wrinkled or heavily creased, the mouth being closed at the time I saw it. I could see no teeth, but the face had some hair on it in the form of a scraggly beard. Its face looked like that of an Australian aborigine, with no offense against those folks whatsoever. Its bodily features were that of one muscle upon another, like that of a comic strip superhero or the likes. The footprints in the yard were at least 20 inches long, if not more, and very wide, with oddly shaped toes being clearly evident. It was simply incredible. In the years following, we had no other further activity relative to my barn or missing items, and we actually remained there for 6 more years after these events of that period of time. Alright guys, today's first video clip is that of a dogman hiding behind a tree, or supposed dogman hiding behind a tree. Some kids are out at night collecting frogs and snakes and spiders and such, and they see something and take off running. The video slowed down. You see what they see. Check it out.
Well, we're not having too much luck. I think I'm gonna call it a night. Okay, this is all we got tonight. Just a frog and a snake. Dude, what in the heck was that?
In my opinion, this is a really interesting clip. It appears that they caught this creature on camera by accident. It could perhaps be the legendary Dogman caught on camera, or maybe some other unknown creature. If these kids actually hoaxed the video...
Definitely a very interesting video. The kids don't really seem to me like they're acting. And then when it's slowed down and you can see it, it really does resemble an upright walking wolf to me. On to today's second encounter. In the summer of 2018, my team of ghost hunters and myself were investigating a graveyard in Herkimer, New Hampshire for paranormal activity. We were equipped that night with several EVP recorders as well as a spirit box. The spirit box scans thousands of frequencies, through which it is said that spirits can be caught talking while it's on. The EVP devices are used to record answers to our questions as well, but in a different format. Don't ask me how these things work, I only know how to use them. The EVP generally picks up things that you haven't heard with your natural ear, while the spirit box runs continually, making a loud hissing or static sound through which we can hear random things being said. Now, we as a team have investigated hundreds of graveyards regionally, as well as many haunted houses. So this was just another night on the job, so to speak, for all of us. As fate would have it, all night long we were getting random hits, as we call them, with spirits answering our questions with yes and no answers, and a variety of other responses. But it was in actuality at the stroke of midnight that the freak show began. We started to pick up frequent and loud, unmistakable growling on the spirit box, which we generally associated with demonic activity of the worst kind, which was going on for about half an hour continuously. When my friend said, "Look at that," he pointed into the woods where there was a pair of glowing red eyes, widespread and glowing brightly, some maybe 10 feet off the ground. I turned the flashlight on and saw nothing as the glowing eyes disappeared simultaneously with the light coming on. The group was freaking out now, with it being the first time something of this nature had occurred. You had to be there to fully understand what I just said, as you would imagine. Collectively, we had to kind of regroup and calm down, which we did before beginning again to make further contact. Antoinette, one in our group, was weeping profusely, sitting with her back against a large grave marker on the ground before we could even begin again. All of us were trying to console her into staying. If not, we would have to leave. So we're all crouched down trying to calm her down, with Brett being the only one still standing as he screams, "Oh my God!" We all look as Antoinette explodes into tears and sob. The red eyes just reappeared, now moving side to side and coming towards us. I grabbed Antoinette and started to run, with the rest of what I am going to share having been told to me by the rest of the two who stayed behind. Leo and Brent, the two of them, had stood their ground when we fled, as this creature, according to them, came into full view. They reported it as being a large, hairy, human-typed creature, some 9 feet tall. Leo put his flashlight right onto it, and this time it remained in full view of the two of them, rocking from side to side in the darkness. Both Leo and Brett said that it started to advance towards them, exploding in a flash of blue light as an orb now appeared and floated away into the woods. At that point, Brett said that all of the electronic devices went dead, the batteries having been mysteriously drained by this event, which there was no other rational explanation for them dying. I'm not a cryptozoologist. I'm a ghost hunter, but what we experienced that night opened our eyes to an entirely different reality. Was this creature growling on the spirit box? I can't say for certain, but what I can say is this: the event most certainly happened with 4 of us being present. Today's second video clip is one that you're going to have to kind of turn your volume up and really pay attention to. Maybe put headphones on. I can hear it on my phone and computer, so I just want to make sure everyone else can hear it. But a guy goes outside, he lets his dogs out, he hears this crazy noise, and his wife and baby come out. And he's freaked out. You can tell he's freaked out because he's looking at his wife and kid and saying, "Get back inside. There's something out here." And you hear this bone-chilling kind of howl coming out of the woods from behind their house. Check it out.
Just let the dogs out and this shit's happening again. Dude, what? Huh. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Listen to that. What? I don't know. Dude, why do you think I brought them in the house and run out here? Listen to that.
No more by themselves, or they be out here right now.
Dude, get him in the house. Get him in the house. Get him in the house.
So some definitely creepy screams or whatever it is. Definitely not something I want to run into. On to tonight's third terrifying experience. And this one is terrifying. Hey everyone, my name is Les. I've lived the majority of my life in Rapid City, South Dakota. In 2018, I moved to a new home in the north side. It was a nice place, a duplex actually. But a few months after, it had gotten weird. It was actually a series of events. The first one involved me and my cousin, who was spending the night, waking me up, telling me to go wake my mom up because my dad was at work, and it was about 5 a.m. I was like, "Dude, why?" And he told me that there was this guy who was sitting there with his arms resting on his knees in the middle of our driveway. My cousin said it had been like that for what felt like a couple hours. To give you a rundown, my house had a porch that led up to my house, and the actual porch was like 4 feet wide all around and 5 feet tall. The back was covered with a pretty big fence and had one door gate. The outside of it was pretty big space, about 12 feet wide, stretching across to the neighbor's fence. There was another fence that separated the driveway from the yard, which was a big piece of land that went downhill, and the front driveway was at least a solid 20 feet between the porch and the actual road. This thing, which was right in the middle of it, crawled away, almost like a feral human would crawl. It crawled, and it was already in the middle of the road in what felt like 2 steps. We went back upstairs and tried to fall asleep, trying to forget about what we had just seen. We ended up staying up because of anxiety. The next event was 2018, around November. I was upstairs playing my video games. When I got bored after losing a match, I looked out the window before opening it, only for me to see that same figure in the driveway, in the exact same pose. Now it's like 8 p.m., so it's pretty dark. But since it was on some snow, it was easier to kind of point out what it was, and I actually could see its ribs, telling me this thing's thin and probably tall. And since it was me and my dad who was there, I knew that I was going to have to wait this out. I heard my dad get out of the shower. He looks outside, because that's just who my dad is, and I hear him yell from the downstairs, "Les, come look at this." This thing is staring us down, growling. It was growling. We could hear it despite the windows and the doors being shut. And that's when I knew this thing was interested in us. This next one happened in midsummer of 2019. It was me, my sisters, and my brother just hanging out. Oh, and my brother's girlfriend, too. I'll call my younger sister Coco, my older sister Pest, and my older sister Mimi, my older brother and his girlfriend Z and Hera. Well, those are not real names. So we were just hanging out, having a good time, when I go, I'm going to go make some Kool-Aid. Because, well, why not? I go and make the Kool-Aid when I look into the window in the kitchen and I see these massive marks with a hole in the lower left corner. These marks were not cracks from someone bludgeoning it with a hammer or even their hands. They seemed like claw marks, and they were large, about the size of an infant's head. I told my family about it. We got paranoid, and we end up leaving it alone. We tell our parents, they tape it up, and everything kind of just moves on until the next experience. So it's now 2020, when everyone is kind of tipped off that this year's going to kind of suck. My mom and dad are in the living room just talking, being theorists, when my dad peeks out the window and this figure is further away, resting its arms on its knees, staring at our porch. Now, this thing seemed big, but my dad had thought nothing of it. He's a smallish guy, but he's an experienced boxer who has weapons coming out of his ass and knew multiple kill tactics, seeing as his dad was a Marine. So my dad was not worried. My dad yells out to this guy, "Hey, what are you doing here? This is my house. Get out of here." Then this thing looks at my dad and stands up. Immediately, the mood changes. It's not like as if people are getting ready to fight. People are getting ready to call the cops now, because this thing was massive. It was thin with lean, muscular arms and thighs and had claws, kind of like a big dog. And despite it being spring and 7, this thing was almost unrecognizable. It wasn't even registering as a human. Maybe because the fact that it's like 8 feet tall and reaches the porch in like 5 steps, despite being 15 feet away, because most of its height was in its arms and legs, specifically the forearms and ankles. My dad immediately shuts the blind, ran into the dining room, shuts the blinds in those windows, and just said, "Be quiet," which eventually led to this creature leaving us alone, but not before looking into the bathroom window, which was not covered, and had an open view of the living room, and its face was ruined. Its eyes were beady and bulging outward. Its mouth was scarred and almost inconsistent in size, having big left side and a mangled right side. This thing was just staring for a good 10 minutes before leaving. It wouldn't stop there, though. Mid-2020, summer of. I would usually use the roof of kind of vent out my feelings and kind of just get a break from being inside as I was young and still kind of am now. One night, after being in a heated confrontation, my older sister was running around with some boy. My dad had been kicked out. Everyone's yelling. It was just a lot. I went up onto the roof just to get some space and not getting involved. I just go off on my own little thoughts. As I was climbing out, I saw that there was this patch of woods that's on the roof. I see it and I think nothing of it. But when I'm fully outside, I see that it's actually wood from below the tiles of the roof, meaning that the tiles had been torn off somehow. I was sitting there and wondering how this had happened. Who could have done this and why? But then after a solid minute, it clicks that it was that thing that had been messing with us for years now. I immediately go inside, close my window, cover the windows, and go on my bed and fall asleep. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to a noise of something crackling, kind of like ice or glass. I get up to inspect the room, and I go into my older sister's room, who is downstairs at the time, kind of comforting my dad because he had just gotten into a big fight with my mom on his birthday and was just really sad at the moment. My little sister was staying in the room, so I asked her, "Hey, did you hear that?" And she just kind of turns to me and says, "Les, what was that?" in a panicked voice. And I look at the window, which is what she kind of backs away from, to see those claws being dug into the window and being dragged across it over and over again. I take my sister downstairs. She immediately starts crying. That moment I grab it because I guess that kind of tells her that this is an issue. She goes and lies by my mom, who asks, "What happened? Why is your sister crying? What did you do?" And we both are at a loss of words. I hadn't seen this thing up close yet, and my sister probably didn't even know there was a thing at all, so we stayed downstairs for the night. When I was So the night moves on and everyone calms down. The next day I climb out onto the roof and look at the patch. It was torn apart. There were pieces of wood sticking out. Most of the wood was already gone. It was also torn off and mangled. And there was just a solid meter of it all around in a circle. Now this next one is up there with the scarier incidents. I was outside in 2021. It was my oldest and little sister's birthday. We were playing outside. I go and grab onto the wooden fence at the top of the hill that I had mentioned earlier. It was our yard. And it was kind of like plank wood. It snapped in half. I got a few splinters. And I knew this wasn't hormones. Testosterone doesn't make you like Spider-Man, as far as I'm concerned. I go and tell my parents, who were inside, watching us go through the door while hanging out with the other adults. My dad goes to inspect along with my uncle, and they figured out the fence was already broken and just in position, kind of holding it up. The way it was broken, you guessed it, something like a tiger slashed at it, and the plank was being held there half broke, kind of dangling. I ask them, "What tells you that they have claws?" And they show me some deep claw marks that were hidden in the plank wood, and so we are immediately sent inside and told to play upstairs in our house. About a month later we move out, and I still haven't forgotten these events. There were many more that I don't remember and don't want to talk about, but I do know that this thing didn't suit us. There were some other smaller incidents. Like one night, my dog had been unleashed and the gate was opened. And she was in the backyard and dead, really young. Another thing, my bike chains constantly seemed to be broken off my bike. Even the garden that my dad was planning to use to kind of help his relationship with my mom just mangled and destroyed. There was like a 3-foot hole in the middle of it. I'm actually getting worried thinking what it could have done if it ever got our hands on any of my family members or friends. I think it's a good thing that we left, because Rapid City, South Dakota is a terrible place all around, especially that part of town I lived in. Sorry for the misspelling and strange writings. It was like 4 in the morning and I've only slept 14 hours this whole week. Man, that is absolutely a chilling and creepy experience. And the next video clip is just as chilling and creepy. It's coming to us from out of Kansas. And I'm not sure what this thing is, but it is big and it is terrifying. Check it out. Definitely a creepy video. I have no idea what it is, and I don't want to know. I know it comes out of Kansas somewhere, but it's definitely freaky. That'll be the end of tonight's upload, or today's upload. Actually, one more clip before we go, but I'll just say goodbye now, and the clip will be at the end of the outro. I want to thank everybody for all of your support. May the Great Spirit be with us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life. The final clip is a guy standing by his lake. No one's around. Dusk. And he hears this bone-chilling scream. Check it out.